Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm particularly pleased to be here. I was lucky enough to hear much of the first part of the session, and I can see what an important gathering this is. Now, they've taken the map away, and I know that it's got one or two exclusions by accident. The fact, though, still remains that it's a very important map, because what it says is that this is a part of the world which matters in a way which people have not recognized before now. When I was a small boy, it was the wonderful stories of daring do that one had, and the idea of going to find the Northwest Passage was one of the stories which one most enjoyed. And of course, the ships which perished, the people who died in those enormously difficult efforts, have been overcome by people going for their summer holidays, going through that very Northwest Passage. For me, it's the symbol of the change. If people say, I'm not sure that climate change is happening, I feel I just want to pack them off up to there so they can see it as clearly as that. But more importantly is that this change in the Arctic region is, as Rosanna Cunningham has said, a change which will affect the whole of the rest of the world. It's a symbol of the fact that the world is one world, the planet is one planet, and what we do anywhere in it affects the rest. And this is the place where we see most clearly the damage which human intervention has actually done. And the Committee on Climate Change was set up to be the independent advisor of both the United Kingdom government and of the national governments of Scotland and Wales, and if there is a government of Northern Ireland. And we do that entirely independently, arm's length, to a whole series of different political parties and with different attitudes. What is extremely cheering is first that there is a commonality of intention among all the major parties in the United Kingdom. Secondly, that there is a degree of competition among the various nationalities to try to do better than their neighbours. And I'm able perfectly independently to say that Scotland is doing best. And I'm using Scotland all the way around the United Kingdom to point out that other people could do better. But as your government will say perfectly properly, doing best is not just a question of having the toughest targets or having the best of intentions. Doing best must mean doing it, must mean achieving it. And there are some very, very tough steps that have to be taken if the full realization of the very adventurous demand of the Scottish Government is going to be possible. And I just want to remind you why that is so important. We have created a world in which climate change is actually the symbol and in many ways the sign of the mistreatment of the planet which we rely on. It should be seen as that. If you have any doubt as to the way it should be put into our language, I suggest whatever religion you have, you read the Pope's encyclical Laudato Si, because what it says is that we should see this climate change as a sign of all the other things that we have got wrong. Whether it's looking after the poor, whether it is treating our soil so badly, whether it's not thinking about the future, whether it's cutting down trees, whether it's dirtying up the oceans, whether it's killing our fish, because we have not thought about the future. So for me, climate change is not just one thing on its own, but it is the biggest physical threat that we have to mankind. And the way that we're trying to deal with it in the United Kingdom, and the way that the nationalities are joining in with such enthusiasm, is a very clear and unusual one. We have set statutory targets. not just to reduce our emissions by 80% by the year 2050, but to have this independent climate change committee which lays down the budgets by which we reach that in the most cost-effective way. And we have just had the 5th carbon budget agreed by Parliament, and that takes us to 2032. I shall be starting on the 6th carbon budget very soon. And the key thing about those budgets is that they are produced well ahead so that people can make their business decisions, their lifestyle decisions within the context of knowing where we intend to be. And they are, secondly, not able to be changed. Once Parliament has passed these budgets, there is no way they can be changed without the Climate Change Committee advising that such change is necessary. It is a unique situation, and it was designed when the Climate Change Act was written for a very important purpose. Democracy demands that we have a regular return to the electorate for their further decision, a point which some people might think about when it comes to people who believe in one man, one vote once in a referendum. But regularly one should return. But climate change, of course, demands that we have a long-term policy which has to go way beyond a 5-year or 4-year period. And to get the balance between those two, the Climate Change Act means that, yes, Parliament's vote on the budget, but no, having voted on them, they can't change them. Now, that's crucial, because people are prepared to vote pretty sensibly, reasonably far ahead. But as you get nearer to the point at which you've got to do things, it becomes more and more easy to try to put them off, to say that would be very much better if we did that next year. My constituency is in some difficulty at the moment, so perhaps we can just put that off. That is the kind of argument that all politicians of all parties in all times find almost irresistible. The situation that we have in Britain is to have a system which makes that impossible. And it's that balance between the short term, which Parliament makes the decision, and the long term, where Parliament has to live with its decision, that has been unique. And as a result, we now have 12 or more countries that are following much the same structure. And they are as different as Mexico and Denmark. There is a remarkable group of us now. So we meet together as the climate change committees, and we are encouraging all sorts of others to follow on. I was in Bonn, as was Rosanna, and I went for a different reason. I went to take the group of scientists who are working with the group of Chinese scientists who are dependent on their committee for climate change. I have to say a rather less independent committee than ours, but it is all the same, it is a committee on climate change. And their scientists and our scientists are working together and advising both governments. So it enables us to have the same advice on the risks of climate change as we know the Chinese government is having. What better way to pave the way for the kind of international agreements that we're going to have as this becomes tougher and tougher as we try to meet not only what Paris has agreed, but what Paris has opened the door to agreeing, that much tougher target of something below 2 degrees, something nearer to 1.5 degrees, which is really necessary if we are to avoid some terrible damage. I want to say 2 other things. The first is this. All of us in rich nations should remember that climate change damages the poor first and most. They are least able to protect themselves from it, and many of them live in some of the conditions which are most vulnerable. Look at Bangladesh. No wonder it has joined with the small countries of the South Pacific, which are sinking beneath the sea. Bangladesh very often 2/3 underwater. Bangladesh, that has to move something like 250,000 of its population every year because of the rising sea levels. And that, of course, is part of the reason why the Arctic is so crucial. The disappearance of Arctic ice and the effect of that through water throughout the world is enormous. But we who are rich should always remember that climate change hits first the poor. And those of us who have some chance of adaptation should remember that they have none. And the second issue that we have to remember is that those of us who have benefited from the pollution which has caused climate change have the duty to pay for its remediation. I'm absolutely, totally clear about this. All of us are living on the enormous advantages of the brilliant Scottish and English and Welsh and Irish entrepreneurs who built the Industrial Revolution. Can't stand in Edinburgh without thinking about the Industrial Revolution. But we did that not knowing what we were doing to the world. We paid for it, not ourselves in that generation, but we left it to the next generation and the generation after to pay the cost of that pollution. We gained the wealth, but we didn't pay the cost. Now we have that cost to pay. And it is absolutely unacceptable to say that the countries that didn't benefit, the countries that are poorer than we are, should pay that cost. And that's why the comment that Rosanna made about the contribution of Scotland to the developing countries so that they, in fact, are able to do the things that are necessary both to grow and enhance their economies and to protect themselves from climate change, that's why that is so central and so vitally important. And in this great meeting and the whole concept of bringing the Arctic Circle countries together, I hope we recognize that those three things have to stand up. The first, with which I began, the Arctic Circle is now clearly important to the whole of the rest of the world. It is a sign of climate change that is more clearly seen here, and it is an effect of climate change that is most clearly going to be seen in this region of the world. Secondly, this is a region which has benefited so much from the very development which caused the climate change, and must therefore be part of the solution and not avoid it and leave it to others. And thirdly, it is a region which within it has got people who are very marginalized. And with those people, we should be thinking about all the marginalized people in the world for whom climate change is such a danger and such a damage. Whether they are marginalized in Scotland because they're living in fuel poverty, whether they are marginalized in other parts of this area because they come from Inuit or other stock who have found themselves increasingly pressured by the New World, or whether they are marginalized simply because the land and the sea upon which they depended is increasingly threatened. They are the people we should be thinking of, and they are the people whom we should seek to ensure no longer are the victims of the misuse of the planet without which we would not be here.